Hey students, it's Mr. Ramage, and this video lesson is going to take a look at the Bill of Rights and how it was added to the American Constitution. And this lesson is going to emphasize the individual rights that are protected by the Bill of Rights, as well as the limitations on governmental power. For the purpose of this lesson, I'm going to be utilizing this standard from the state of Ohio and focusing on the final portion of this standard that states, "The Bill of Rights provides constitutional protections for individual liberties and limits on governmental power." So as we go through the Bill of Rights, we're going to be looking for what are those individual liberties and what are the limits on the government's power. So a little backstory, of course, as we go through the ratification process of the Constitution, it's been written, and now the ratification goes to the states. Massachusetts, after the first 5 states ratified the Constitution relatively quickly, Massachusetts says they are not going to ratify this Constitution. They have some serious issues with it. Well, James Madison is going to lead the charge for compromise, and the compromise is going to be over the issue of amendments. As we already know, the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists have been debating the Constitution, and the Anti-Federalists bring up the point that there is no guarantee of civil liberties in this document of government. Federalists counter that there's no need to add that list because the Constitution guarantees everybody's rights through the democratic process. But this has to be an issue that is resolved before major states like Massachusetts, Virginia, and New York ratify the Constitution. So the Massachusetts Compromise is made, which essentially says that the state of Massachusetts will agree to ratify the Constitution in exchange for the addition of a Bill of Rights immediately following the creation of this new government under this new Constitution. And it all works out, actually. On June the 8th, 1789, James Madison goes before Congress and proposes 17 amendments made during the states during the ratification process. Through debate in the House and the Senate, those 17 amendments are then reduced to 12. And on September the 5th, 1789, Congress approves these 12 amendments, which are then shipped off to all of the states for ratification. We can see lots of X's and editing and crossing out here in a shot of the actual Bill of Rights edited in the U.S. Senate during the debates that took place. And as the states ratify those amendments on December the 15th, 1791, 10 of those 12s are officially ratified by the states and therefore added to the U.S. Constitution, becoming the law of the land, the first 10 amendments known as the Bill of Rights. So let's take a look a little bit more closely at these 10 amendments that made it into the Constitution. And again, we are looking for what are the individual liberties guaranteed in the Bill of Rights and what limits are placed on governmental power. So starting with our First Amendment, the individual liberties, of course, are your freedom of speech and religion, the press, the right to peacefully assemble, as well as the right to petition the government for a redress of grievances. So these are all individual liberties that are guaranteed underneath the First Amendment. Now again, any and all liberties are not without limitations and restrictions, but these individual liberties are guaranteed through the First Amendment. Obviously, it's placing limitations on governmental power. The government cannot establish a religion, could not prohibit your free exercise of speech or press, or to peacefully assemble. And the government has to accept people's petitions to redress grievances. So again, the individual liberties and the limits on governmental power kind of go hand in hand. If it's an individual liberty, it therefore places some type of limitation on the government's power. Amendment number 2, individual liberty. Hey, you can own a firearm. We're not even going to dive into this controversial amendment. Amendment 3 is a bit outdated, but it was a huge issue during colonial times. Amendment 3's individual liberty is that you are free from the government forcing you to quarter troops in your home in peacetime or in time of war as well. But again, another outdated one from colonial time periods. Now, Amendment 4 really gets things going into the legal rights that we as Americans have. So the individual liberties guaranteed Americans in the Fourth Amendment are freedom from illegal searches and seizures of one's possession. So again, we are placing limitations on the governmental power. They cannot simply come into your property and seize or take everything they want. There's a process that they must go through in order to do that, and we're protected from those unreasonable searches and seizures. Now, this has gotten a little complex over the last couple of decades in terms of when we can search, what is probable cause. The courts have ruled back and forth on this issue. But if we're studying the Bill of Rights in terms of what are those individual liberties, you are free from illegal searches and seizures. The Fifth Amendment also continues to list for you what your individual liberties are in terms of court cases or the due process that we all have as Americans, which is covered here in the Fifth Amendment. So you have to be indicted by a grand jury in a capital crime. So grand jury has to rule on the evidence presented to them before you can be charged with a crime in some sort of capital case. You're protected from double jeopardy. That's an individual liberty that you are protected from. You can't be tried twice for the same crime. You are not forced to testify against oneself. Everybody knows to plead the Fifth, so you're free and protected from having to testify against yourself. You are guaranteed this due process of law. Every step along the way is guaranteed to you. The government must go through this due process. And then private property, you shall have private property. It should be protected and not taken from you without due process or without just compensation. So you're free to own your own property. So again, numerous individual liberties listed here in the Fifth Amendment. And these are all, again, place limitations on the government's power. They just can't throw you in jail. They can't continually try you over and over. They can't force you to testify against yourself. They can't take away your due process. And they can't seize your property without due process or just compensation. The Sixth Amendment, again, guarantees numerous individual liberties. In criminal prosecutions, you have the right to a speedy trial. You have the right to an impartial jury. You have the right to be informed of the charges against you. You have the right to question witnesses who testify against you. You have the right to call witnesses in your defense. And of course, you have the right to counsel. You have the right to a lawyer. So again, numerous individual liberties which place limitations on governmental power. They can't just throw you in jail for an extended period of time. You are guaranteed a jury. You must be informed of the charges. So again, these are all things that are protected as individual liberties by the Bill of Rights. Seventh Amendment is relatively short. Essentially, this individual liberty is that you have the right to a jury in a civil case. Don't need a lot of explanation on that. A civil case is a trial or a case between two private citizens. It's not a criminal trial. The Eighth Amendment protects American citizens from unreasonable bail and fines that would be levied in a court, or protection from, it's not or, and protection from cruel or unusual punishment. Again, we could talk about the death penalty and go to that whole debate here as well. Numerous states have already abolished the death penalty, while many states have kept it. So the Eighth Amendment has protections for you in terms of your individual liberties, protection from excessive fines and bail, and protection from cruel and unusual punishment. So the Ninth Amendment to the Constitution is a little complicated. It's worded a little strange, but if you look at the breakdown here, what are the individual liberties that I've listed? Essentially, the Ninth Amendment says that you have more rights than what is listed in the Bill of Rights. So one of the arguments against including a Bill of Rights by the Federalists was that if we start to make a list of rights, what if we leave something off? And does that imply that if it's not on the list, you don't have that right? So the Ninth Amendment sort of addresses that argument that yes, you have way more rights than what is listed here in the Bill of Rights. These are not the only rights you have as American citizens. And if a right is not listed in the Constitution, it doesn't belong to the federal government. It belongs to the people. It is retained by the people. So in the language of the amendment, it says, shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people, that the federal government cannot, through the limitations of the Bill of Rights, take away or deny any rights if they're not specifically listed in the Bill of Rights. And the 10th Amendment says the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution nor prohibited to it by the states are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. Again, this can be a little confusing in terms of the language, but basically the individual liberty that we're talking about here is that if there is something that is not specifically given to the federal government, then it belongs to the people and or to the states. So any of the powers that the federal government has are what are called delegated powers. They're specifically stated in the Constitution. Anything that the federal government can do has to be in the Constitution. If it doesn't say that the federal government can do it, then they can't do it. Those powers then are reserved for the states. So anything not listed in the Constitution is reserved to the states or to the people. So that is a very quick breakdown of the individual liberties and the limitations on government put into place through the Bill of Rights. And again, coming back to the standard, it says the Bill of Rights provides constitutional protections for individual liberties and limits on governmental power. And that's what the Bill of Rights does. Thanks for watching this video lesson. I hope you learned something.